Today, I will be introducing 7 real-world objects that are said to be either haunted or cursed. Let's begin with our first item, the Swansea statue. This wooden figure, often called the Swansea Devil or Old Nick, is tied to a curse born from a story that began in the 1890s. At the time, an old church in Swansea was in need of rebuilding, and a public call was made for design submissions. Among the many entries was one from a very famous architect named Arthur Blomfield. His design was ultimately selected, much to his delight. However, there was another man whose submission was rejected, and he became consumed with anger. Believing his talent had been disrespected, he held a deep and bitter grudge. Years later, after the church was rebuilt to Blomfield's design, a row of houses next to it went up for sale. The bitter man purchased the property, demolished the buildings, and constructed a brewery in their place. Atop the brewery, he placed a wooden statue he had carved himself. He positioned it to stare directly at the church and proclaimed a curse that when the day came that the church was destroyed by fire, his statue would remain, sitting and laughing at its ruin. Then, during the Second World War, specifically in 1941, the church was bombed. It suffered catastrophic damage and was ravaged by fire. Yet, the man's wooden statue survived completely unharmed. His curse, it appeared, had come true. After the war ended, the church was rebuilt from the original plans. The brewery was eventually torn down, and the statue was lost for some time before being found and returned to its original spot. Later, a shopping center was built on the site, and the owner moved the statue to a museum. It is currently on display at the Swansea Museum. In the end, the curse was tied only to the church and that specific time, so the statue today isn't considered to be especially frightening.
Our second object is known as Busby's chair. This piece of furniture holds a truly terrible curse linked to the following story. In the 1700s, there was a man named Thomas Busby, who is the central figure of this tale. There was also another man, much older than Busby, named Daniel. The two lived quite close to one another, and on one of his visits, Busby discovered that Daniel was counterfeiting money. After some discussion, Daniel convinced Busby to join his illegal operation. The two began producing fake currency together, working frequently from Daniel's home. During this time, Busby grew close to Daniel's daughter. They eventually fell in love and were married. For a while, everything in Busby's life seemed to be going perfectly, but one day that all changed. Busby returned home heavily intoxicated to find his father-in-law, Daniel, waiting inside. Daniel, his face filled with anger, confronted Busby for mistreating his daughter. An argument broke out, and in his drunken state, Busby physically fought with Daniel, throwing him out of the house. Seeing that Busby was too drunk to be reasoned with, Daniel decided to leave and speak with him later. But Busby, consumed by a furious rage, made a terrible decision. He grabbed a hammer, walked over to Daniel's house, and murdered him. Daniel's body was eventually discovered, and in 1702, Busby was arrested and sentenced to death. Before his execution, he was granted one last wish, to have a final drink at his favorite pub. He was taken to the tavern, where he sat in his usual chair to have his drink. After he finished, he stood up, pointed to the seat, and uttered a curse, that death would come to anyone who dared to sit in his chair. Not long after, he was executed. In the time that followed, a series of strange events began to unfold at the pub. One man who sat in the chair was found dead shortly after leaving, murdered by a friend. Later, a construction worker came into the pub and sat down in the same chair. He ordered a drink, and afterward returned to work. Only a few hours later, while working on a roof, he slipped and fell to his death. There were also pilots who would visit the pub and sit in the chair. After they left for war, they were never seen again. It is believed that Busby's chair is responsible for the deaths of some 60 people. Eventually, the pub was bought by a man who knew the stories surrounding the chair. For safety, he decided to move it to a museum. Today, this is what Busby's chair looks like. It is on display at the Thirsk Museum, hung high on a wall to prevent anyone from sitting in it. Sometime later, a historian studying the chair concluded that it was likely manufactured around the year 1840. Thomas Busby was executed in 1702, which would mean the chair has no connection to him at all. And yet every accident attributed to the chair occurred after 1840. So, even if it has nothing to do with Busby, the chair itself seems to hold a terrible curse of its own.
This brings us to our third object, the Hope Diamond. This is an exceptionally large diamond, weighing 45.52 carats with a deep blue color, caused by trace impurities within the stone. The diamond carries a curse that has brought misfortune to many who have possessed it. Its story begins in 1653 with a French gem merchant named Tavernier. One day, he visited a diamond mine in India and discovered this remarkable blue stone. The moment he saw it, he was determined to buy it. At the time, the King of France was Louis XIV, and Tavernier traveled to meet him to sell the blue diamond. The king was captivated by the gem and purchased it from Tavernier and named it the Blue of France. The king later suffered from a severe case of gangrene and died from the illness. The next notable part of the story involves King Louis XVI, who inherited the blue diamond. Soon after coming into its possession, he and his wife were publicly executed during the French Revolution. In the chaos that followed, the diamond was lost. Though it originated in France, the gem somehow made its way to England, where it passed through the hands of several owners. Between 1830 and 1839, the diamond was acquired by the Hope family. It was first owned by Henry Philip Hope, then passed down to his son, Thomas Hope, then to her daughter, Annie Adela Hope, and finally to his grandson, Lord Francis Hope. Because the diamond remained with this family for so long, it became known as the Hope Diamond. It was later owned by this woman, May Yohe, the wife of the last Hope family member to possess it. She was a musical theater actress, and after acquiring the diamond, she went through numerous divorces and marriages, eventually dying in poverty. In time, the diamond came into the hands of a very powerful man named Edward McLean, the owner of a newspaper company, and his well-known wife, Evelyn McLean. After they acquired the gem, Edward developed a mental illness and Evelyn died from pneumonia. After passing through several more hands, the diamond reached its final private owner, a man named Harry Winston. He decided not to keep the diamond for himself, but instead donated it to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History, where it remains on display to this day. The Hope Diamond is said to have brought misfortune to many others, but I have shared only a few of the most prominent cases. In general, the tales of bad luck surrounding the diamond seem to attract more fascination from visitors than fear.
The fourth object is the Okiku doll. This is a story from Japan, originating in the Hokkaido region. According to Japanese folklore, the story is as follows. In 1918, there was a little girl named Okiku. One day, her brother gave her a doll. Okiku immediately fell in love with it, but not long after, a tragedy occurred. The little girl passed away from a cold. Her family created an altar in her memory, placing her favorite doll upon it and naming it Okiku in her honor. As the family prayed for her, strange things began to happen. They would hear noises and whispers in the house, but most remarkably, they noticed that the doll's hair was growing longer. At first, these signs frightened the family, but they soon came to believe that the spirit of their daughter resided within the doll, and their fear turned to comfort. Eventually, the family had to move away. Believing that Okiku's spirit should remain near her final resting place, they decided not to take the doll with them. Instead, they entrusted it to a nearby temple, asking the monks to care for it. To this day, the doll's hair continues to grow, and the monks must trim it regularly. Many people visit the temple to see the doll, though they are not permitted to take photographs. Overall, it is a story that is perhaps more sorrowful than it is frightening.
Our fifth object is Robert the doll. This is what Robert looks like today, and as you can see, he is wearing a white outfit, though this was not his original clothing. The story of Robert's curse begins as follows.
In 1904, a boy named Robert Eugene Otto, who was often called Gene or Otto, was given a doll by his grandfather, who had purchased it in Germany. The boy loved the doll instantly and played with it every day. He loved it so much that he gave it his own name, Robert. From this point on, I will refer to the doll as Robert and the boy as Otto. Whenever something unfortunate happened in the house, Otto would insist that Robert was to blame. The doll was constantly accused of causing all the household's misfortunes, and it is believed that this constant blame caused the doll to develop feelings of its own. This is a picture of Otto's home. One day, a group of children were passing by the house when they looked up at a window and saw the doll sitting in the room. They then watched as Robert the doll moved from one spot to another, and this sight terrified them. On certain days when guests were visiting Otto's home, they noticed that if Robert the doll was nearby, its facial expression would seem to change depending on the topic of their conversation. After Otto passed away, the house was purchased by a new owner who kept the doll for a while before eventually donating it to a museum. This is what Robert the doll looks like today. He is dressed in a white sailor suit that is believed to have belonged to Otto as a child. The doll is currently on display in a museum where many people come to see and photograph him. But the story doesn't stop there. The museum has received countless letters, all of them written to apologize to Robert. After visiting the doll, people report experiencing terrible misfortune, such as losing their jobs, getting into car accidents, or going through a divorce. They believe these things happened because they disrespected Robert, whether intentionally or not. For this reason, visitors who come to see Robert today make sure to treat him with respect. It is worth noting that if you look closely at the doll, you can see a small dog with him. The origin of this dog is unknown. Some believe it is Robert's own toy, while others think it was added simply to enhance the mystery. In any case, the dog is not a significant part of the story. The most unsettling part remains Robert the doll himself.
This leads us to our sixth object, the Annabelle doll. When people think of Annabelle, they usually picture this one, a porcelain doll created for the movies. However, the Annabelle films were actually inspired by a real doll, this one. The real Annabelle is a cloth doll made in the likeness of a character from a book series called Raggedy Ann. The true story of the Annabelle doll goes like this. In 1970, a young nursing student named Donna was given the doll by her mother for her birthday. She brought it back to the apartment she shared with a roommate, and it was not long before strange things began to occur. One day, the two women left the doll on a sofa before heading out. When Donna returned home, she noticed the doll was missing and had no idea where it had gone. She then walked into her bedroom and saw something horrifying. The doll was in her bedroom, even though it was clear that no one could have moved it there. The strange occurrences continued. One day, Donna found a piece of parchment in the apartment with the words, "Help me," written on it. It wasn't even a type of paper that she kept in the house. At this point, she was terrified and invited a medium to the apartment to find out what was happening with the doll. The woman explained that the doll contained the spirit of a little girl named Annabelle. She said the spirit simply wanted to be loved and cared for, and if Donna and her roommate would do so, everything would be fine. But the situation was still deeply unsettling. This is when a famous couple entered the story, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Here is a real photograph of them. They were experts in investigating, researching, and collecting paranormal objects. Donna managed to contact the Warrens, who came and took the doll away. It was then put on display in the Warrens Museum, enclosed in a case with a warning, "Positively do not open." However, it is important to note that this entire story, as we know it, was told by Ed Warren himself. He was the one who recounted the complete tale of the Annabelle doll, so it is impossible to know if the story is true. Many people even claim that the Warrens' entire collection consisted of fakes and had no real paranormal connections. Nevertheless, there is no denying that the story of Annabelle was the inspiration for the highly successful film series. The Warrens Museum was later closed, and all of the paranormal objects inside were removed. Because of this, no one knows where Annabelle is today. For all we know, she could be in your house right now.
And that brings us to our seventh object, the Dybbuk box.
It is a small box designed to look like a wine cabinet and was typically used to store wine. The story of this box begins in 2003 when it was listed for sale on eBay. The seller included a story with the listing, claiming the box had once belonged to a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust. According to the seller, the box contained a dybbuk. In Jewish folklore, a dybbuk is a malicious and dangerous spirit that seeks to possess the bodies of the living. So clearly, the box was incredibly dangerous. Despite this, many people were eager to buy it. After being listed for sale, the box was bought and sold multiple times, and each new owner reported a host of strange phenomena that they attributed to it. However, all of these claims were later rendered meaningless. A man named Kevin Mannis, the person who first found the box, listed it on eBay and created its elaborate backstory, admitted that he had invented the entire tale. A closer examination later revealed that the box was not from the Holocaust era at all, but was actually made in New York. Because of this, nearly every story associated with the object is considered to be untrue. I will add a personal note here. When I was younger, I heard stories about this box and was terrified of it. I'm not sure why, but every time I looked at it, I felt a deep sense of fear, perhaps from not knowing what might be inside. But now that I'm older and knowing the true story, I'm thankfully no longer afraid of it. The box, like some of the other objects, also inspired the creation of several films. And those were the stories of 7 cursed objects. I hope that after watching this, you will still be able to sleep well tonight. For now, goodbye.